Alright, so I'm going to review for the test. It's going to be pretty much like what's on the test. Just listen to the responses, okay? So first of all, when you're taking this Journeys test for Helen Keller, you're going to want to know what is a biography. And so when we talk about a biography, we need to know that we're talking about a real person. We're not talking about poems. We're not talking about made-up fictional characters. The biographies are about real people. Okay, it's about real events that happen in people's lives. When we're talking about real people, we want to also know why the author would want to write about these people. Why do people want to tell their story? At the beginning of the story of Helen Keller, we see that Helen is outside and she's touching an animal. And we hear about the coarse hair, and we hear about that the tail slaps her in her face, and these things come back. Why do we think that the author wants to start us off right off the bat about feeling the coarse hair and how the tail is slapping her in her face? What point could the author be doing in order to give us information? So we want to know, when the author tells us about this, we know Helen Keller is blind and that she can't speak and she can't hear. So right off the bat, the author doesn't just come out and say that. The author is showing us how Helen feels in her world, like how it is not to be able to see or hear, so she has to touch her items. So in the beginning, she touches the cow, and the author's letting the reader know that this is Helen's world, that everything has to be touched and how she feels and what it feels like. Okay? When in the story it says she could not see her father's smile or the pretty flowers outside her window. So the author goes into describing how there's pretty flowers and she couldn't see her father's smile. So you come to wonder, why would the author want to know this? She's not wanting to show you that nothing's important. She's not wanting to show you that it's not hard. She's telling you how much Helen is missing out. We take for granted the simple things, the pretty flowers outside, or a smile, or this and that. And so the author is wanting to try to get the reader to understand what Helen is missing through her life. So then we want to show how Helen is angry, and the author does this by using certain words to show. She shows angry by saying words like screamed and kicked and cried. And the author really wants the reader to know that Helen is very angry about not being able to see or hear or speak because she's trapped inside of herself. So then we go through, and her parents go and find Dr. Alexander Graham Bell. And he's important into changing Helen's life because he didn't teach her sign language. He didn't promise anything. He told the family that he would help. He would try to find someone to help. That's what Alexander Graham Bell did. He didn't teach her sign language. He didn't go and get the teacher. He sent them to someone to find the teacher. Alexander Graham Bell changed Helen's life because he was willing to help. So in the story, we see that the teacher comes along, Annie Sullivan, and Helen is not nice to Annie at first, and the author goes into details about knocking out her front tooth and locking her in her room. And you wonder why the author tells us this. Is it just to tell funny stories? Is it telling us that to show that Helen was hard to work with, or that Annie couldn't be trusted? Well, nowhere in the story does the author show us that Annie can't be trusted, the teacher. Annie's the teacher. Nowhere does it say. It doesn't say that Helen's playful. Knocking out a front tooth is not playful. The author was trying to relate to the reader is that Helen was a difficult, a tough, a hard student to work with. You're coming with a girl who can't see, who can't hear, who can't speak, who's angry. And so we really want to see the difficulties that Annie had when she began to teach Helen. So on the story, there were headings. Some had dates, some had places. And so on these headings, the dates that have it, these are telling about the years of Helen's life. We're not talking about when it was written. We're not talking about world events or anything. That those dates in the story are talking about when things are happening in Helen's life. This is what happened. It's Helen's timeline. When she was born, when she went here, when she went there. Okay? So, the best way to show that this article is about a real person is that she includes some photos of Helen. She shows pictures of actual Helen in real life. There's numerous pictures of Helen Keller. There's a picture of Alexander Graham Bell. So this shows that this is a true story. It's not fiction. It's a biography. It's about a person's events and their life. So back to Annie Sullivan. We want to talk about Annie Sullivan, the teacher. So Annie didn't write this story. She's not made up. Annie is a teacher who really lived. Annie is the best way, the best description of Annie Sullivan is to know she was a teacher who really lived. At the end of the article, what we can tell the most is that Helen has evolved. She used to like to be alone. Now she does not. It's not at the end. We all know who Helen Keller is. Most people know her throughout. So we do know by the end of the article that Helen Keller is famous. So Helen Keller is famous, and she has a great story about her. And this is a good biography to start reading. And if you're curious to know more about Helen Keller, there's plenty of other biographies out there.